Hello, this is Dr. Mingle with our week ending June 5th, 2020 COVID-19 school closure update with a focus on our planning for returning to school operations. This week, we finished a week of our asynchronous model with synchronous connections with our virtual field trip on Wednesday, as has been the norm throughout the school closure. Next week's schedule is a little bit different. We have full school days Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. The virtual field trip day will be on Friday, June 12th, which is going to assist us with the materials pickup and drop-off procedures that are going to take place on Wednesday, June 10th for Warren Middle School students, and Friday, June 12th for all 4 elementary schools. Each parent should have received a letter from the building principal with a great deal of detail about that process. Please read it carefully, as your cooperation is greatly appreciated as we work through a safe process for returning materials that we have of yours and getting back materials that you might have of ours. A follow-up email was also sent to people who are participating in district-sponsored summer programs about technology usage, so please check for that as well. Next week, there will also be a robust parent and staff survey shared earlier in the week about a host of questions related to the return to school process. It's very important that we have engagement from as many people as possible. So you will find that for parents, this survey is connected to the Genesis portal, parent portal, so that people participate in the survey prior to accessing their students' final report cards for the year, just as a reminder and a helpful check-in to ask for your participation. It will be a little bit longer than our regular weekly surveys, but your input is greatly appreciated and necessary as we make some decisions about the future. And then the week of June 15th and 16th, we have 2 half days on Monday and Tuesday. Our teachers and administrators are hard at work to make sure that we close out the school year as a community with some positive, fun, end of the year activities, even if they are different than what we're typically used to. Our Return to School Committee continues to work towards our vision of safely returning all students and staff members to the Warren Township schools. As a reminder, we do not yet have guidance from the state of New Jersey or Governor Murphy about the timeline for when schools will be allowed to reopen and under what conditions. And so in the absence of state guidance, and until we receive it, the district is planning for multiple scenarios using the best available data and guidance we have right now. Those scenarios have been narrowed down to 4 big buckets that I'd like to talk about today. The first scenario, the one we all want, is to return all students to the physical buildings, all at once, all back in school. The second scenario is that we bring some students back in physical buildings while some students are virtual in some kind of a rotating fashion. The third scenario is that all students remain in a virtual setting. And the fourth scenario is that there's intermittent virtual instruction, perhaps because of an outbreak of COVID-19 or some other condition that might arise. These 4 scenarios come from the National Institute for Excellence in Teaching Planning Guide and represent the current thinking around the state of New Jersey and in the states that have already issued guidance to their school districts. So we are now working through processes to come up with what it would look like for all students to be in physical buildings under the guidelines the CDC has already released, some kind of combination, hybrid program, or a virtual program. Just as a sample, the document, which is publicly available from the NIET, National Institute for Excellence in Teaching, provides numerous considerations for operations, such as how do we look at our building facilities and make sure that we're maintaining physical distancing and limiting mixing? How do we determine which staff and students fall into high-risk health categories and what that means for us? How do we rethink our students' schedules, things like the cafeterias and so on? That all fits into either scenario 1 or 2 when we bring students back. Scenario 3 for virtual includes an item to look back at how we did this year and identify the areas that need to be stepped up if we were to continue in virtual, whether that be permanent or in some kind of intermittent status when we come back in the fall. And then considerations about things like our food service programs, how we make sure all families continue to have access to Wi-Fi, what teaching tools and resources are necessary, et cetera. That's in the operational side. In the academic side, in the scenario where all kids come back to physical buildings, we need to make sure that we're looking at survey data from our families, at academic performance data that we establish, decide what supports are needed for students, whether or not there's any adjustments to the school day for academic reasons, and ensure that the learning continues and that areas where gaps develop that may not have been expected because of the distance learning, that we find ways to intervene and mitigate those gaps. In scenario 3, under the academics and all students being virtual, this includes making sure our staff continues to receive the appropriate kinds of professional learning experiences so that their skills develop throughout the summer into the next school year, that we think about what curriculum looks like, whether we are in person or virtual or in some kind of a hybrid. What are the impacts on things like teacher observations and evaluation and so on. And finally, there's a section about student, family, and staff support considerations. So how do we make sure that everybody feels supported and has the guidance and the resource they need under each of the various scenarios? For example, under scenario 1, making sure that we fully understand the implications that COVID-19 had on our families and our staff members. As many of you are probably aware, there are numerous Warren families and staff members who had people very close to them either deal with the illness or have somebody pass away, and that has implications for our operations. Making sure that we have our school counselors, our mental health professionals, our nurses, everybody available to provide support. Thinking about how this affects the way it feels to come to school and work in an environment that looks and feels very different than it did the last time we were together in March. On the virtual side, making sure that we have options for people to connect in synchronous opportunities between teachers and their students, making sure that our character education programs and our social emotional learning that we do in the school year in person continues in the virtual space as it has in many cases, and identify how we reopen school in a new school year in a virtual space, even if we're back in person, with things like open houses and meet and greets so that everybody feels like they're a part of what might be a new community for students who are transitioning, for example, from 5th to 6th grade or into kindergarten for the first time. So obviously there's a lot of consideration underway. Those plans are being worked on and established. You can expect updates on our progress each week, not only through the end of the school year, but throughout the summer as well. As I shared last week, we have a whole list of resources that we're using as guidance as we see how other professional organizations and states are dealing with all the different questions. This is the list I shared last week. Since then, we've added to that document and are thinking a study published by The Lancet about the benefits of using face coverings. We have guidance now from the states of Arizona, Georgia, Missouri, as well as the Denver public schools about how they are reopening. And one of the benefits we have of not reopening until September is that we will have at least a month, in some cases more like 6 weeks, of information from other states that start their school years earlier in the summer. And so we'll see what's working and what's not working from those places as we move closer and closer to our reopening date in the fall. And then we have the National Institute for Excellence in Teaching Guide, which I shared some samples from, and a document with a planning workbook for leaders of things to consider. Many of these documents are now coalescing around certain central ideas that we need to consider. Some of those ideas will be surveyed, will be included in our survey to you, so we can get a sense of where our parent and staff member communities feel our priorities should be, which options make sense, which ones maybe wouldn't work as well. And that can help guide the work that our return to school committees do over the summer. You will continue to receive emails and video briefings each week throughout the summer. They will move to Thursdays once the school year is closed. And the Return to School dashboard has been added to the district website. So if you just go to warrentboe.org, there's now a new image there for Return to School dashboard, which has all 150 action items and their current status. Doesn't give you all the details behind it, but we wanted to make sure that everybody in the community could see the things that we were working on and know which things were coming, even if they haven't been addressed yet. With that, I'd like to thank you for another wonderful week under challenging circumstances, of course. I know that all of our students, our parents, and our staff members are working as hard as they can to make this experience and the closure of a school year as positive and healthy as possible. If you have questions or comments about school closure or the return to school process, you are welcome to send them to the COVID-19@warrentboe.org email. Thank you and have a wonderful weekend.